I'm now coming back as our countdown continues. Skip Chauvin informing the astronauts that the swing arm now coming back. 4 minutes and counting. We are go for Apollo 11. We'll be coming up in the automatic sequence about 10 or 15 seconds from this time. The vehicle starting to pressurize as far as the propellant tanks are concerned, and all is still go as we monitor our status for it. Firing command coming in now. We're on an automatic sequence as the master computer supervises hundreds of events occurring over these last few minutes. 2 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. Oxidizer tanks in the second and third stages now have pressurized. T-minus 1 minute, 35 seconds. The third stage completely pressurized. T-minus 60 seconds and counting. We passed T-minus 60. 30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6.
Looking good, down a half.
60, Roger.
6 forward.
60, 60 seconds.
60 seconds. Lights on. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow.
Down
4
lap
forward.
30.
That's 4 forward, drifting to the right a little.
30, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Forward, just. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Since those words were beamed back to Earth, more people have been inspired to travel through the universe. And even today, a strong core of astronaut and specialized space professionals have grown significantly, each accepting the challenge of space travel. Many of them were inspired by man's first walk on the moon.
The journey to the moon has long been an attraction to space pioneers such as Robert Goddard, John Glenn, and Neil Armstrong. But to reach the moon was but only an imaginary flight for many of Earth's early dreamers.
One of those dreamers probably did more to inspire men to go for the moon than the actual landing. Robert Goddard, known today as the father of rocketry, was inspired as a young boy by a fictional work about 3 men traveling to the moon. The book was the first to describe the launch of the first space capsule and became his blueprint for space travel. He dared chart the same course to the moon as the man who dreamed the future, Jules Verne.
Jules Verne, born in France in 1828, was a struggling writer who discovered a technique of mixing scientific fact with fiction to interest his readers. One of the authors he admired was an American writer, Edgar Allan Poe, one of the more serious writers in applying scientific principles in a fictional work. It was Poe's Hans Fall about a balloonist reaching the high altitudes in the first ever described space capsule that helped Verne to try his hand at an imaginary moon journey.
In the 19th century, scientists were aware of certain fundamental problems that had to be overcome in space travel. The Earth's gravitational pull, no air in space, and the need for artificial atmosphere in the long trips between the Earth and the Moon or the nearby planets. By taking all the current scientific knowledge in the early 1860s, Jules Verne began to research the gravitational effects, planetary motions, geology, and the space environment to include them into the type of fiction that gave this author the honor as the father of modern science fiction.
To send his heroes into space in one of his most famous works, From the Earth to the Moon, Verne had to rely on the current inventions and their adaptations to space travel. In 1865, the only thing flying around were the balloons, and the only engine was a steam engine, and both of them require air on the airless outer space. So Verne looked to the invention that was in the world news to propel his projectile into space. The invention was the cannon, and the war was the Civil War.
Scientists had known for centuries that any object falling toward the Earth will hit the Earth's surface at about 7 miles per second. Thus, any object leaving the gravitational pull of the Earth will have to leave at the same speed. Today, we call that escape velocity. So Jules Verne decided to use this scientific fact to send his fictional projectile to the moon by firing it from a cannon at a speed of 7 miles per second, a speed that is only 500th of a mile off today's accepted rate of 6.95 miles per second.
This fictional cannon was aimed at the moon, a diameter he cites as 2,150 miles. The author was off by 10 miles since the moon's actual size is 2,160 miles. Verne had also had to calculate the distances from the Earth to the moon and was only off again an average of 5,000 miles in both the maximum and minimum distances.
Where to locate this interplanetary cannon became Verne's next concern. He used the atlases of his day to choose a site in a country he had never visited prior to the book's publication in 1865. It is interesting, if not amazing, to note that the town he chose to construct his launch site is near a town called Tampa, a location 120 miles west across the Florida Peninsula from today's Kennedy Space Center.
In his book, Verne had the construction workers digging into the Florida soil, past the sand, chalk, and finally the hard bed of soil made of petrified shells. Not a bad description of Florida's geology, but he has site at 1,800 feet above sea level. The highest point in Florida is the Panhandle and is only 345 feet above sea level. But then again, he had only the atlases of the 1860s and the stories of sailors to go by. In designing his spacecraft, Verne uses the current state-of-the-art technology and chooses to use a new type of metal called aluminum, a reasonable choice and one that eventually became the standard for today's spacecraft. Again, it was Verne's clever use of realistic detail in describing the shape being similar to a bullet, but it was the size and weight of the capsule that amazed the space engineers today. He was but just a few inches and pounds off the total size and weight of the Apollo capsules that went to the moon over 100 years later.
While Verne's cannon was impractical and would result in certain death, he was the first to foresee that a space capsule would become white hot as it raced through the Earth's atmosphere and that its passengers would experience weightlessness. He also predicted the use of electricity to power the space vehicle and even invented the idea of computers.
Using his cousin, a mathematician, Verne used his calculations to determine the time it would take to lift off the Earth and to eventually reach the moon's orbit. The fictional time was 97 hours, 13 minutes, and 20 seconds, not too far off the 1969 liftoff and lunar landing of 100 hours and 46 minutes.
Jules Verne also knew the value of keeping his readers in suspense when he ended his book with his three heroes trapped in an orbit around the moon. He continued his story in a later publication with the men making observations of the lunar surface before concluding that the moon's harsh conditions, lack of atmosphere, and extreme temperatures during the lunar night and day would not support life. To break away from the moon's gravitational pull, the fictional characters fired the rockets located outside their capsule. Again, Verne used a scientifically proven method developed many years later as a source of propulsion.
In his second book, All Around the Moon, published in 1870, the men re-entered the Earth's atmosphere before landing in the Pacific Ocean, where they were picked up by an American ship. These fictional heroes were treated with a national celebration, not unlike the modern-day heroes in 1969, 99 years later.
Jules Verne in his lifetime wrote 63 books, many of which fired the imagination of his readers, and his imagined inventions served as the blueprints for the future. He was once quoted as saying, "Whatever one man is capable of imagining, other men will prove themselves capable of realizing." This is a man who not only dreamed the future, but inspired him.